Donald Trump will be president, the veto session is coming, and Aaron Schock gets indicted. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. With me today in this post-election conversation are Mike Lawrence, retired director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, former press secretary to Jim Edgar, longtime reporter before that. Mike, your resume is the whole show. Welcome back.
Well, it's good to be back.
Bruce Rushton is also here, reporter with the Illinois Times. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks to be here.
Okay, Illinois went as predicted in the presidential race. Hillary Clinton was an early call. In fact, when Tammy Duckworth won for U.S. Senate, she talked about what a Clinton presidency was going to look like early in the evening. Then the returns kept coming in. Donald Trump ended up being president. It's kind of interesting for what this means to Illinois. Hillary Clinton was an Illinois native. We've had a Democrat in the White House. We have a Democratic mayor of Chicago. We have a Republican governor, Bruce Rauner, who wouldn't mention Donald Trump's name for several months before the election. So what does the Trump presidency coming mean to Illinois?
Well, I think one thing it means, and we might want to get into this in more detail later, but one thing it means is that in 2018, when Governor Rauner runs for election, or I should say if he runs for re-election.
Which he has said he wants to do.
It could well have an adverse impact on him. Typically, the party that is not in the White House does not do especially well in the next election.
But on the other hand, you got to throw precedent out the window here. I mean, nothing like this has ever happened. Well, it has.
Are you talking about Donald?
Well, yeah, you have to go
back. Or are you
back.
talking about the amount of money that's going to be in the Illinois campaign?
Well, no. I mean, what I'm talking about, you got to go back to, I mean, there have been comparisons drawn between Trump and Jackson, you know, back in the 1820s, 1824, 1828, the way back when. And those are not inapt comparisons. I mean, what you've got here is anybody who tells you what a Trump presidency is going to look like is making it up, because nobody knows what a Trump presidency looks like. I mean, nobody knows what this guy stands for. Even his supporters don't know. All they know is they voted for change. And when you try pinning them down, the Atlantic magazine had it put it best. Folks, the media took Trump literally, but not seriously. His supporters took him literally or seriously, but not literally. And so when you talk about stuff like the wall and that sort of stuff, that was never going to happen. And the folks who supported him believed, they kind of knew it was a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So we don't know. I mean, and for example, the stock market. I mean, Paul Krugman of the New York Times goes out, writes this thing at 12:20 a.m. on election morning saying that the stock market will never recover from this. And the next morning it goes to the ceiling. And so, the thing is that we don't know. This is quite a ride, and one that's unprecedented in any of our lifetimes.
Well, I will say that everybody, not everybody, but most people in the press who are watching the polls or commenting on what they thought they saw, I'm one who regularly makes predictions in a column just the weekend before the election. Of course, on a national race, you depend on the polls, you depend on what you hear. And I thought Hillary Clinton would win Illinois and the country. Obviously, I was right about Illinois and really wrong about the country. Because Illinois was actually more typical to what those polls showed. There's a strength. We are become an overwhelmingly Democratic state. We have 4/5 of the people are in the Chicago area. So Hillary Clinton is from the Chicago area originally, actually born in the same hospital as me.
But what we don't know here, really.
But Trump was very popular, by the way, and some of the people I talked to on Election Day in Central Illinois. You go to Springfield, Illinois, West Side, Rochester, Illinois, a couple of places I interviewed people. They were some reluctant, but still very strong for change or for what Trump promised to bring in the post-Obama era that they were looking for.
What I don't think we have yet is a breakdown on how much of this was pro-Trump and how much of it was anti-Clinton.
A lot of anti-Clinton.
A lot of anti-Clinton. And so would we even be having this conversation if the Democrats had run a different candidate? We can't know that for sure. I mean, nobody will ever know that for sure. And that's what makes this such an interesting riddle to solve.
Well, the point I made earlier, if you look at the historical data, and I understand Trump's a different phenomenon, but I think if I were Rauner sitting in his shoes, I wouldn't be celebrating too much the Trump victory.
Yeah, well, Governor Rauner did put out a post-election statement, like midday, the day after, and it just said, the acrimony of the election is over, let's move forward. But as he has not done in the last few months, he didn't mention the name of the new president, who was of his own party. And he was talking more about the legislature and let's get together now.
The other point I'd make here, if you're talking about Trump in Illinois, if you look at it, the Senate race, state Senate race in the Franklin County area, southern Illinois,
The Gary Forby.
Gary Forby, after several efforts by the Republicans to dislodge Gary, this one worked. And if you look at Trump's numbers down there, they were, to use a word, huge. And John Bradley lost. Now,
Who's another Southern Illinois House member, right?
Now
Democrat.
There can be other factors, but I feel like the strong Trump performance certainly had an impact. If I were still in the business of advising politicians, and I'm not, I would want to do focus groups right now, or at least within the week, to try to get more out of what those numbers meant. And for example, in John Bradley's race, how much of that was John Bradley? How much of that could be attributed to the heavy negative commercials tying Bradley to Speaker Madigan?
Right. Which happened to Gary Forby too, even though he's a member of the Senate and not the House.
And those are the kind of things I'd want to know, both sides, Democrats and Republicans, going into 2018. Now, the mood of the people, the mood of the country, the mood of the state could be different 2 years from now. But for now, those are things I'd want to know.
I mean, I think first off, the governor's played this exactly right. I mean, when something like this comes at you and you don't know what to make of it, you take the safe course of action and say nothing. And so I think
he's good at that.
Well, yeah, well, at times, yeah. And so I think that he's done that well. And I think that a continued wait and see approach is probably the right course to take. I mean, I've taken a look at some of these precincts too out in the rural areas, and I've seen a few where Clinton got beat, but other Democratic candidates such as Mendoza won, and Duckworth won in the same precincts, and that's not necessarily unusual, and so that kind of also gives rise to the question of how much of this was anti-Clinton versus pro-Trump.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, let's, as we know, Governor Rauner did a lot of the funding of Republican races across the state by himself through his committee, through the Republican Party, and through direct contributions. But and a lot of it was tying his nemesis in the legislature, House Speaker Michael Madigan, who is also the chairman of the Democratic Party of Illinois, to all these other legislators and trying to defeat them, and they did defeat some. One Republican, Dwight Kay in Southern Illinois, got defeated, so that was a pickup for the Democrats in the House. But let's see, John Bradley, you mentioned, Kate Clunan, Jack Franks was resigning anyway, and a Republican took his place. Andy Skoog and Mike Smitty are the names of the Democrats across the state who are out and replaced by Republicans. Net pickup of 4, so there will be, instead of 71, there'll be 67 Republicans in the Illinois House to 51. 67 Democrats to 51 Republicans. In the Senate, John Sullivan from Beardstown, very kind of a Republican area, but he was a known entity and a longtime member of the Senate Democrat who decided to retire. And Jill Tracy, who we know because she was a lieutenant governor candidate in the primary in 2014, to Kirk Dillard, and a former member of the Illinois House. She's ran unopposed, so she'll be a Republican in the Senate. And of course, Gary Forby lost. So the Senate goes from 39 Democrats to 37, but they still have a big advantage over Republicans who will only go up to 22. So Monday, or next week, Tuesday, the veto session starts. There are 5 or 6 scheduled days. Governor Rauner has called for a meeting of the leaders either in Springfield or Chicago as we tape this show, saying, let's get together and try to work out, let's forget all this election stuff that we said these bad things about each other, see if we can, move on the budget and some other issues. How's that going to work?
Well, I think it's going to continue to be very tough. Speaker Madigan lost his so-called supermajority, veto-proof majority. He really never had a working supermajority.
Right, 71 was just enough to do it, but they didn't have all the members on board on everything.
It wasn't real world
But
math.
one thing that I think will come about is, I think Governor Rauner, who has had pretty much of an iron grip on Republican legislators, will continue to have that grip. If they had not picked up seats, it might have been a different matter. And even though that pickup that they did wasn't, all that great, it wasn't sweeping, I think that Republican legislators are going to continue to take their orders from Governor Rauner, because they're counting on him to fund their campaigns, and he did have some success this year. So what that will do, I think, will harden the resolve on the Republican side. Meanwhile, on the Democrat side, Speaker Madigan's looking at 2018, when Rauner presumably will be running, and when the governor elected in 2018 will be the redistricting governor. And and he's had this attack from Governor Rauner, personal.
A lot of it is about that he's corrupt.
Yeah, in many respects. So I don't know whether he's going to be in a great mood to move things forward and work with Governor Rauner.
Well, I mean, you look at this and what happened on Election Day here. Prior to Election Day, there was talk about Dick Durbin running for governor. What's going to happen with that now? I think it's probably much less likely that you see Durbin throw his hat into a gubernatorial race ring. And so which Democrat then would go against Rauner? And that's the head scratcher. And so I think it really does help solidify Rauner's power and position, even though I don't think it does much at all to move the ball forward in terms of getting a budget passed or actually doing the business of government. I think it actually makes it more difficult to do that.
Well, Mike Frerichs is one person, the state treasurer, that's been talked about for governor. People over time have talked about Lisa Madigan, the attorney general and daughter of the speaker, but the Madigan name has been dragged through the mud so much, and her kind of continuing enjoyment of being attorney general, I don't necessarily see that at this point. We'll see. And
I think politically the governor is in a very strong position right now. I mean, it's stronger than it was prior to Election Day, but on the other hand, when it comes to Madigan's content to wait. I mean, it's just, I think, more stalemate.
But interestingly, one other thing that happened, even in this Trump year, there was two statewide races. And both of them went to the Democrats. So we had Tammy Duckworth, Congresswoman from Hoffman Estates up in the northern suburbs, easily defeating Mark Kirk, who was contending with the stroke that he had in 2012, et cetera, and some odd comments he made along the way. So she was an easy winner. That was kind of expected, even in all the nationwide. And then Susana Mendoza, who she's from Chicago. She's the Chicago city clerk, and she was put up for the last 2 years of Judy Bartopinka's term after the unfortunate death of Judy Bartopinka after her last election, for state comptroller for the last 2 years of that. And Susana Mendoza beat Leslie Munger, who was seen as, because she had been appointed to that position by Governor Rauner, it seemed to be a proxy war. Everybody said, this really represents the Madigan versus Rauner, and the Democrat side won. So what does that indicate?
Well, I think first off, I think you do have to throw out the Duckworth Kirk race, because I think Kirk was such a weak candidate there. But the comptroller's race, I think, was a different matter. You had fairly strong candidates, both of who were articulate, acquitted themselves well, came across well to voters, and the Democrat won. And so you're looking at what kind of message does that send? Well, if you're really looking at tea leaves, I think that it might encourage you for a Democratic statewide race, going forward in 2018. Is it enough to trump, so to speak, Rauner bucks? It's way too early to tell, but I think that's what I'd be thinking about.
Illinois is still a blue state. When all said and done, it doesn't mean a Republican can't win. The other thing is races for governor, when you have an incumbent running, are really more a referendum on the incumbent. There are exceptions. Blagojevich has run against Topinka. He made her the issue. And,
right. Well, that's because he showed those pictures of her doing the polka with George Ryan.
And he
come into legal trouble.
He outspent her, 5 or 6 to 1. Now, we know Rauner will put in a ton of money. So I think the Democrats will be looking for someone who won't raise an equivalent amount of money, but can raise enough money to be competitive. Now, if that's true, a guy like Chris Kennedy
Oh, yes. that's
might
right.
be a good possibility.
RFK's son.
On the Democrat side. I think the Kennedy name is still a good name, not only in Illinois, but across the nation. And he may be able to generate sufficient resources. I don't know that he's going to run. I think he's gearing up to run.
Right.
And he is new to campaigning, particularly.
Yeah, he's a little nervous in talking to reporters, but he's getting better at it, I think.
That's right.
And after a couple of recent tries,
Yeah.
one at the convention where he didn't want to talk afterwards, the Democratic National Convention, but then in Springfield he spoke to reporters for a while and had a bit of a sense of humor, and he's actually done a couple of really strong op-eds or letters to the editor and I think the Chicago papers criticizing the Rauner administration and saying you don't have to have your turnaround agenda. Some of the anti-union measures that the governor wants to at least cut into the power of public sector unions. Kennedy says businesses don't want that as much as they want stability, and by not having a budget through your demands, we're not getting stability. So he's been very strong as a critic of the governor, as I think building that name you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I mean, you're right. It's a blue state, but it's not navy blue. I mean, we've always had, a smattering. We've had a Judy Bart Topinka. We've had a Rutherford. We've had, a George Ryan. I mean, they come and they go, and so it's not necessarily sealed up, tight as a drum. I think where Rauner is perhaps running a risk here in 2018 is again, okay, how's the incumbent doing here? And he risks, I think, if we're still stalemated, if we are 2 years from now where we are today, then I think gets you can tag him with the label. You're part of the problem, sir. I mean, you're just part of politics as usual. You said you were going to come and shake up Springfield, and you got stuck like a fly to tar paper.
I think it's important to remember that he won in 2014 because Pat Quinn was very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know the Rauner people argue they got a mandate out of that, but the fact of the matter is, if you look at the primary that year, Pat Quinn lost a whole bunch of counties downstate to a no-name from Chicago.
T.O. Hardeman.
So,
yes, that's right. I think it was more than 30 counties, you're right.
Yeah. So, that, again, was a referendum on the incumbent.
Right. And the governor, Rauner, spent like $65 million on that race, $27 million of his own, and that was unprecedented because that was like twice as much as any other governor's race had ever cost. I think it'll be $100 million in 2018, by the way.
I mean, I think you're exactly right. You can make the argument that Rauner has been governing as if he had a mandate, and that's far from initial.
Well, and he also still has dealing with a Democratic majority in both houses, which makes it hard for him to get his agenda passed. And despite the fact that they gained those seats, they still are dealing with Democratic majorities and their Republican governor. Let's talk about, speaking of Republican elected officials who had been, Aaron Schock, somewhat of a boy wonder, elected to the Peoria School Board when he was 19. He was, I think, the youngest member at the time of the Illinois legislature, and then he was elected in his mid-20s to Congress. Well, this week he got indicted, 24-count indictment for, he did resign a year ago from Congress after questions arose about his spending. A lot of it was reimbursement for mileage that people said he didn't drive, and that's part of the 24 counts. Obviously, some of what created the bad publicity for him was when a reporter walked into his office in Washington and it was being redecorated to look like a room from Downton Abbey or something, and it was actually a Jacksonville decorator doing the work for him, and how payments were handled, and anyway, some of it was false statements, false tax returns, and Aaron Schock's lawyer in the early stories says this is prosecutorial overreach and being political, and there were inadvertent administrative errors, and so he, at this point, is defending himself. Where's this one going, Bruce?
Well, not going well for Mr. Schock, clearly. The minimum thing he's facing here is income tax evasion, and that's got a maximum term of 3 years. The other ones have maximums of 20s. If he goes to jail, I wish him, it's a sad thing, but I hope he spends the time writing a book, because I'd sure love to read it. I mean, this guy he had it all.
He was on magazine covers
On
because he
magazine
was
covers.
in shape.
It begs the word Icarus. I mean, he flew too close to the sun, and here we are. The Instagram stock went down several points. The day that he left office.
You're making that up, Bruce.
Well, I am making that part up. But the thing is, it was all there for us to see, and it was so outrageously in your face that it all collapsed so quickly. Like the proverbial house of cards. It's an amazing tale, really.
Yeah, and of course there's a local angle to people who work in Springfield because Aaron Schock, part of the 18th Congressional District, came into Springfield. It comes into Springfield's west side. He actually is the one that established the office downtown Springfield on a prominent corner because he liked people to see his office, and he talked about it as service, and that of course has now been taken over by the congressman who replaced him in a special election and now has won his own term, which is Darren LaHood.
Ironic, short walk to the courthouse.
Right across the street.
That's good. He had a meteoric rise and flamed out. And part of the problem, when you do have that kind of rise and the kind of success he had, beginning as a write-in candidate for the school board in Peoria, it's hard to keep your head. Now, I'm not prejudging his guilt here. But
even that long press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office said you're innocent until you're proven guilty.
But the fact of the matter is there was behavior there that indicated that he had not maintained a level head, whether he did anything illegal or not. And that happens.
Yeah, it is tough. You are dealing with a lot of rich donors all the time, and you see this lifestyle. And
everybody's nice to you when you're in those offices. They may badmouth you behind your back, but they're nice to you. Part of that is being polite, but the other part is they want things from you.
And let's not forget, to get to where he was, as quickly as he did, it takes amazing political skills to do that. I mean, and raising, Titanic-sized boatloads of money for other folks.
When he first ran for Congress, he ran against a guy who had been on the Peoria City Council. He ran against a businessman who'd been all over the country developing sites for a hotel chain, and Aaron Schock just blew by him.
Aaron Schock,
it was unbelievable.
If Aaron Schock had played his cards right, you got to wonder, would we one day have been talking about Governor Schock or Senator Schock?
On the other hand, when he was considering maybe doing a run for governor in 2014, there was a mysterious campaign that spent about $1 million running ads in Central Illinois against him. Nobody knows where that money came from. It was some office. It was some office in Ohio or something. And at the time, Aaron Schock's chief of staff blamed Bruce Rauner for that, and Bruce Rauner has always said it wasn't me or disavows any knowledge.
And Bruce Rauner also says he didn't get involved in legislative races. Well,
that's different though, because we know he gave the money to that. We don't know that he gave the money to run these anti-Schock ads. It's just there was a lot of suspicion, and Rauner's name was mentioned publicly.
Somebody did, and somebody also, compiled this information and leaked it. For a lot of this stuff that's led to the indictments. There's always been this suspicion, and absolutely unprovable. But it's a parlor game. Who was behind this? And Governor Rauner has always been kind of on the list of suspects. This just didn't fall like manna from heaven out of nowhere. Somebody was behind this.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Governor Rauner, in a couple weeks leading up to the election, I could be wrong by one or two events, but I don't think he had any public events. Certainly not around Springfield. He kind of cut back, and this is as many stories were coming out about how many millions of dollars he spent like $30 million, I think, on various races of his own money or from his fund.
I think it ended up being more than that.
More than it could be, with 60 maybe it's 60 from him, but it's with
Didn't he
with
drive
his friend
his
Ken
van
Griffin
off somewhere? I think he went.
He did drive it well. He posted a picture on social media saying the troopers are always upset when I drive off in the van myself. Yes, it was the trash can van that he used in his ads.
Yeah.
So
he
probably had his Carhartt on, but I'm not sure. We'll see. I don't mean to. I'm glad we had a little interlude there because I don't mean to do the Aaron Schock discussion and then ask what's going on with Frank Montino, our Auditor General. But
because one's a
what's
Democrat,
going
one's
on.
a Republican. So
but Frank Montino certainly not charged with anything. But there's been an investigation of how he used his campaign fund as a legislator before the legislature named him to the job he has. Bruce, where is that? There was some
Well,
appellate court
he
decision.
had, the State Board of Elections had been trying to do this investigation in response to a citizen complaint, and Frank Matino said, "No, you can't investigate me," as if the State Board of Elections has a big precedent for doing, really hardcore investigations. Anyway, so he can't testify before the State Board of Elections because he would have to take the fifth, which never looks good, and so he wants everything to be put on hold. Wanted everything to be put on hold while the U.S. Attorney did its thing, and so a court last week or within the past week said, "No, that's that. This is this. Completely different processes." So the State Board of Election can go forward. So the State Board of Election is going to go forward. My understanding of this is the State Board of Election, equal number of Republicans, equal number of Democrats. The odds that they're going to do anything other than say tisk, tisk, tisk is probably fairly small, but it never looks good anyway. And you don't want, where Matino is, he can't, because he's under criminal investigation by the feds, he has to just stay clammed up. He can't provide any documents, any information whatsoever, because staying out of prison is his number one.
Well, it's a tough situation.
It's a tough situation, so he's somewhat hamstrung.
Yeah, and what he did was, there were like $200,000 in bills over a number of years to a gas station that he used for.
Sure.
And so it's a question of if they're all appropriately spent.
I mean, this is just tea leaves, but I think he resigns. I think he resigns in January. That's when his pension goes up by 60-some%, and he goes from something like less than $100,000 to well over $100,000 in pension. He goes into the sunset, and he has time to deal with this.
Well, you are gutsier with your predictions than I am, Mike.
Well, he's in a particularly sensitive place here too, because he's the Auditor General.
He's the one that roots out corruption.
The Auditor General, as you say, is supposed to be investigating and criticizing, and even if for some reason the federal investigation doesn't lead to an indictment, the fact of the matter is he's still subject to criticism as the Auditor General. His credibility is in question. And just briefly, his House district, from which he was elected, the Democrat running to succeed him lost. And that has been generally
for a long time
a Democrat area.
Yeah, because Frank's father was in the legislature too.
So.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it doesn't mean, when I say I think he's going to resign, it doesn't mean he's guilty of anything. It just means that's the easiest solution for everybody. It works for him. It works for the political establishment. It works pretty much for everybody, and so that's the path of least resistance. So
sorry to the Auditor General, but that's how I'm going to have to end it. Mike Lawrence, Bruce Rushton, thanks for the conversation. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.